Hey guys, this is Mrs. Burley. I'm just recapping what we did today in class. Today is Wednesday, February 19th. And overall what we did was we finished the infographic activity from yesterday, and then we began to look at some of the things that we could do to solve some of the obstacles that relate to hunger. Just as a reminder before I get started, current events is Friday, and you should know if you're presenting. Also, geography is due tomorrow. I'm not going to be here, but you will still go over geography with the subs, so you should have that done. Also, as long as I'm mentioning substitute, tomorrow, like I said, I'm not going to be here. You're going to be in the library, and you're going to be completing another infographic analysis activity, this time about solutions for hunger. So you're going to be given a very similar looking handout like the ones that we've been doing. And I'm not sure exactly how many infographics will be on it yet, but you will have to answer questions based on what you see in those infographics. You're welcome to use a library computer, or if you have your own device, you could certainly scan the QR code or open your email. I'll send it to your emails tonight or tomorrow morning. So you can access it multiple ways. It's up to you. All right, so let's jump into what we did today in class. Most classes were on the third infographic, so maybe I'll just start here. I do see that there's a typo there. Let's take care of that. All right. Most of us were left on what's wrong with our food system. So let's make it nice and big so we can see it. If your class already got to this point, then it might be just a little bit of a review for you. But here we are. What we talked about is how, as a result of climate change, we're seeing different things happen. We're seeing rising temperatures, which ultimately leads to a decrease. You see that yellow arrow down at the bottom there. This is a decrease in production, and the orange signifies an increase in prices. So high temperatures, drought, monsoons, and heavy rains, that all leads to a decrease in production, which ultimately leads to that rise in production. In prices, as we just said. And one place that we see this happening actually is in California right now. Excuse that window. In California, they're seeing a terrible drought right now. And if you look, let's see, this was a good picture. If you look at this picture here, this shows us in 2013, just last year on January 13th, you could see the vegetation. It's green. Things are growing there. This year on the same day, you could see how dry and barren it is. Even these clouds that you see over here on the left, that's evidence that there's moisture in the air. And in the picture on the right, we're just not seeing that. So the problem is that most of our produce, our fruits and our vegetables, they're all coming from California. So if California, let's go back to our infographic real quickly. If California, as a result of drought, is not producing enough food, we're going to see the prices go up, and we're going to have to buy that food then from other places. So we're going to have to see what happens with that, but it's going to affect all of us. The next piece was, for number 2, explain how developing and industrialized nations waste a third of their food. And it looks very differently in both places. In the developing world, and when we talk about the developing world, we're talking about countries like those that we listed on that previous infographic, the countries that are struggling with hunger, the countries that don't have food security and stable governments and industries and reliable access to resources. These are developing countries. So the problem there is that we could get the food to those areas, but even when we do, they don't necessarily have the storage, the refrigeration, and the transportation that they need to keep that food fresh. So the food actually goes bad and gets wasted just because there's no place to store it. Now, in our country and in other industrialized countries, the problem is that we have too much food. We overbuy. We have too many options. We let it go bad, or we don't like something, and we simply throw it away. Now, that's not to say, maybe you've heard your parents say, like, oh, eat your dinner because there's starving children in Africa. That's not saying, let's bundle up the food that we would throw away and send it to another country. Certainly that's not the case, but maybe the root of the problem is that the food isn't being distributed evenly. Something we have to work out. All right, so scrolling over to the side here, let's see if I could pull it over. What we see is this topic here in the middle. And I've said this yesterday, if we could empower women, if we could give them tools, seeds, and transportation, give them equal opportunities to farming, we could help with the problem of hunger. So there and again, that's a connection between two different Millennium Development Goals, linking the empowerment of women and hunger. All right, so let's move on to this final infographic. Let's see. Okay, sorry about that. There's our final infographic. I saw somebody coming outside and I paused just in case they came in and messed up my whole video. All right, so looking at this infographic, it's long and some of it I find kind of surprising, but I think that it has a lot of valuable information for us. They define hunger, which we know. They graph the amount of hunger. They show a map. And again, I think this reaffirms what we already know. Most of our hungry population is in Asia and the Pacific. A lot of people think that it's Africa, and there is a great number of people that are hungry in Africa, but Asia outnumbers them. Now, a lot of students brought up a very good point that there's a lot more people in Asia. That's absolutely true. What we don't know, and I mean, people do know, I'm saying we as a class do not know what the ratio is of people who are hungry to people who are well fed. That would be interesting, and when the end of the marking period starts to come around, you're going to be designing your own infographics to explain one or more MDGs. That's going to be up to you. Some piece of data that you might choose to include in your infographic would be that ratio. Maybe rather than having a map that simply highlights the number of hungry people, maybe it would be interesting to see how many people are hungry and how many people are not, and to portray that in some nice visual way. All right, I love this population map because I think it's very simple, but it says it all. In 1804, we had a population of 1 billion. So it took us over 100 years to reach 2 billion. And then it took us just over 30 years to get to 3. And then just over 10 to get to 4. And then again, just a little bit over 10, almost 15 to get us to 5. So we see that this population is not only rising, but it's rising much more quickly as time progresses. So by 2083, the United Nations thinks that we're going to reach a population of 10 billion. Now, as we saw in that video the other day about the population and space, I don't think it's so much an issue of where are we going to put all these people, but it is going to be interesting to see the evidence and the effects of this population boom in terms of pollution, food, water, development, things like that. All right, let's move on. Reverend Thomas Malthus, he had this principle that basically said if we don't control our population, it's going to grow to be so great that we're not going to be able to feed everybody. And that is a concern that many people do have, but many people would also argue that we do have plenty of food. It just, again, comes down to that idea of where is the food and who has access to it. So some people believe that we need to control the population for this reason. Other people think that we need to figure out how to get more food to more people. All right, moving on. 4 factors to the food crisis that this particular infographic highlights. Natural disasters, and those can include some of the things that we've talked about, like drought, monsoons, rising temperatures, but also earthquakes and hurricanes and different things. That destroys the land, and if the land is destroyed, you can't use it for agriculture. So that's a problem. Political conflict, war, civil unrest. You have to imagine if there's a war going on in your country, it might not necessarily be that easy to go and access food. Similarly, these organizations, these relief organizations that bring food to places that need it, they don't necessarily want to go into places where there's political unrest. So that's something to consider. Poor agricultural practices. Basically, some countries don't have the technology. They don't know the most effective way to farm and to get the most from their work. In America, we've kind of gotten it down to a science, and we have college courses. We have entire colleges and degrees that focus on horticulture and agriculture and agro businesses. Other countries don't have that. Sometimes it's just simple education that they need. And then a lack of infrastructure. That's sort of like the backbone of your country. What keeps it running? The government and the currency and the roads and the electric and the grid. All these things that make your country go. If that's not in place, then how are you going to make sure that everybody is eating? Okay, something got tripped up for a second, so I'm not exactly sure where I left off. But we just went over these 4 factors of hunger. So moving forward, we just reviewed again that the United States, this argument is that in a year, 40 million tons of food is wasted. So quick fact. Now this part really kind of stood out to me. This particular infographic highlights 2 solutions that they believe could help to eradicate, and we know that means get rid of, world hunger. And one is this idea of voluntary aid, reaching out, donations, going to places and helping. We've discussed this. However, there's another option that I'm sort of surprised to see them mentioning, but it's this genetically modified crops. There's a big movement right now against this. Basically, genetically modified crops, I'm going to give you the super simplified version. They're crops where the genetics or the DNA is actually altered in such a way that it allows that crop to grow bigger, to grow more plentiful, to give it a longer shelf life, to make it last a little bit longer so that it can be transported greater distances. All things that make food more accessible. So that is a good thing. The problem with genetically modified crops and foods is that we don't really know. Hang on one second. Sorry about that. Quick interruption. Genetically modified crops, as I was saying. I'm no expert when it comes to this topic, but from what I understand, there's chemicals, preservatives, different things that we do to make food more accessible to people. But in the long term, these are the types of things that really can mess with our bodies, whether it's long-term effects through diseases or genetic modifications that could affect our future children. Sometimes they can cause things such as ADHD, ADD, autism. Sometimes it's been linked to that. So again, I am no expert. I just know that there's a huge push to avoid GMOs, and it's not easy to do because, consider a potato chip, something that seems like a processed food in a bag, made in a factory and everything else, but you don't know what was done to that potato. In fact, we were reading an article, Ms. Beddix and I were talking, we were reading an article recently where the potatoes that potato farmers were giving to potato chip companies, they were quoted as saying that they would never eat those potatoes themselves. The potatoes that they consume, they grow separately because they don't like the chemicals that are being put into the potatoes that they're selling to potato chip companies. So I hate to devastate those of you who love potato chips. I know that definitely put a dent in my potato chip consumption, which is a bummer. It's my favorite snack. But it's something to think about. Yes, there's a benefit because we could feed more people, but really, what's the long-term effect of that? It's just something to think about. And then moving on through the rest of this infographic, what are some things that we can do? You could donate a day's pay. This particular infographic suggests that 1 paycheck each year would help to fight hunger. I feel like that's a lot of money, but it's a nice goal to shoot for, I guess. When we talk about distribute and donate, basically what we're saying is, I know a lot of restaurants like in cities will do this. The food that they don't eat at the end of the day or that they don't sell, or a bakery, any bread that isn't sold or purchased that will just go stale the next day, they'll actually donate all of that to soup kitchens. And sometimes there's organizations that will come around and collect that food and then donate it to where it needs to go. This one, Celebrate Brotherhood. I have to laugh because it says donate the money that you'd plan to spend on a birthday or a graduation party and give it to the hungry. I could just see that poor child who, you tell them they can't have their birthday party because we're going to donate their money to starving children in Asia. But it is very nice in theory, but I feel like something that maybe people would be more inclined to do is like the Heifer International organization that we supported around Christmas time this year. You collect some money, and rather than spending money on frivolous things or buying toys that you don't need or whatever, you use that money to donate something that a village does need, which I think is wonderful. When we talk about play, click, buy, there's programs such as free rice. Trophy means it's a prize. And you click and you just donated 10 grains of rice. In is a hotel, and now I've donated 20 grains of rice. So when you do this, the money actually does go to supporting hunger. And I shouldn't say supporting hunger, but supporting the fight against hunger. There's actually a number of different games that you can do now. It used to just be vocabulary. I can't find it right now, subjects. But I believe there's math and geography, chemistry. Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of different topics. Sorry about that, guys. I'm very sloppy today with my recording. If you missed it, I was showing everyone free rice, and I was showing how I think it worked before. To cooperate means to work together. You click and you earn some rice. So this does really get donated. And what I was showing you is that there's so many different subjects that you can actually play and donate money. So that's a good thing. All right, so the final way that we could help curb hunger is to spread the word. And I think that's what we do in this class. Through our human rights projects, through the infographics that you're going to be designing, those projects ultimately, I'm hoping, will be shared and will help raise awareness. That's our goal, and that's the goal for me. That's why I've designed this course, is to help raise awareness with you. So that was the conclusion of the infographic activity. The next thing I wanted to do with the class was look at some of these obstacles to hunger, and then we were using them to fill out, let's see if I can find it. No, it's not on here. Hang on one second. Sorry about this. Development goals. All right, what can we do to help? This was the other worksheet that we received in class today, and the idea was to go around from station to station reading about each one of these obstacles and then email, whatever. The only problem is, what if they don't have the technology? So how do we get the technology in their hands? And that opens up a whole other type of program. But we certainly could do that. I know that a few years ago there was this big push for what was called the $100 laptop, and it had this little crank on the side, and you would actually crank it up to generate it because, in areas where they don't necessarily have electricity or whatever, they could crank this laptop and it would actually work, and students had laptops in their hands. So if we could do that and we can get them a hotspot, then they could Skype with people in America, which would be amazing. All right, and for most of these, you can do the rest of these on your own. Unfortunately, this piece got rushed at the end of class, so we didn't have a ton of time to go into depth with this anyway. So if you look it over and just sort of think about some of these options, that would absolutely suffice. The point that I wanted to make with this, and hopefully we can come back to this on Monday, was just that when we link some of these ideas, like if we know that we can get technology to children in Kenya and we can communicate with them, then maybe if we could reach areas where there are children and people who are hungry, maybe through giving them technology and Skyping with them, we can communicate with them and teach them ways to sustain themselves better, or teach them better agricultural practices or things like that. So once you start making connections between these different obstacles, that's when you make some real solutions. So anyway, I think we're pretty much done with what we covered today. Just a reminder again for tomorrow, Geography 17 is due. You will be here with a substitute in the library analyzing some more infographics about solutions to hunger. And then on Friday we have current events. So I'll see all of you on Friday. Have a great day, guys.